just wanted to go over the team's makeup, go over like how they were created, the players that they're based off, things like that, the role that I expect them to do. So a lot of you who are halfway familiar with this project, who have talked to me about it, you're aware that a lot of these players um, I made up when I was, like 10 or 11. Me and my best friend Dylan and his brother Marshall, they had a wiffle ball field out in their front yard. So growing up, we would play one on one, and the twist was like we would play 9 inning games with us being our favorite team with ghost runners, ghost fielders, stuff like that. If there was a pop fly and it looked like something a guy would have caught, when they'd be out. As the years progressed and we got better, we had to institute a lot more rules, which some of these players, specifically the hitters, um, had very purposefully designed flaws or strengths to play into that narrative. And so, yeah, let's get into this a little bit more. And then maybe I could tell you, like, so starting with our starting pitchers, we got Billy Taylor. Billy Taylor is based off of uh, 1997 Roger Clemens, which was like one of the best seasons by any pitcher ever. Uh, Billy Taylor is a creation of Dylan, uh, and he was Dylan's ace for a while, and then he switched him to closer because John Smoltz was a phenomenon in like the early 2000s. He switched over from being a starting pitcher to a closer, and I think he was kind of trying to mirror that in our league a little bit. So, but over the years, Taylor's kind of his narrative. He's 28. You could see that he's in his prime. So, the story behind his character here is that he went overseas for 5 or 6 years and pitched over there and really honed his craft. And now he's back and he's our obvious ace, our number one. You see there, we got him for a 10-year deal at 23.8 million, and maybe go over some of his quirks here. Cannon, he has a strong throwing arm. He's gonna be our best pitcher, no matter how you slice it. Um, so yeah, I'm really interested to see how he does it, how he works. Andy Benz was one of my creations, and he was my ace through the majority of our time, and he really hasn't changed much since then. He was always a crafty left-hander. I always thought I kind of wanted to craft him after Greg Maddux, but because from what I remember of Greg Maddux in his later years is he wasn't really known for his strikeouts, but Greg Maddux was striking out people a lot more than what I always envisioned Andy Benz to do. So I had to find kind of like a middle ground there to where he would still be lights out while not relying on the strikeout pitch. And the best option I could find was 1992 season for Tom Glavine. And you see here, I got him locked up for 7 years. And I went through and I manually changed all these salaries and the years just to kind of give them a window of opportunity, or I locked up some of the better guys for longer. And how I did that was I went through and compared their overall and their position in what I uh, think that their role is going to be on the team, and compared that to players with a similar rating and playing and role, and I added the salary, and the years was something I just completely did to my own accord. So yeah, I expect Andy Benz to be improving every single year while providing us with a number two option and giving us a completely different style of pitching from the sheer strike you out mentality of Taylor and Benz. I mean Taylor and Macchio. Um, if anything happened to Taylor, Benz would be our number one, and I'd still be very comfortable with that. You see, we got a 93 and a 99. If we look around the league, that's probably the best 1-2 punch in baseball. Just to show you here, there's two 90s here in Houston, and 95, 93, that's pretty close. So you see, like, we got a 1-2 punch that's rivaling some of the best in baseball here. That's where that's Andy Benz anyway. Jake Macchio was one of Dylan's creations, and when we were kids, he was kind of like the journeyman guy. Like, I had him for a little while, Dylan had him for a little while, Marshall had him for a while, and we gave him to some I wouldn't call it computer, but it's the same mentality. Trying to think of the word for it. So, like, when we played our leagues, we assumed all 32 teams would be playing. All 32 teams would and we controlled our favorite team. So I was controlling the Yankees, Dylan was controlling the Reds. Before that, he was controlling the Indians because he switched favorite teams early in the 2000s, and Marshall controlled the Braves. So, and there was a brief stint for like 2 years where I was all about the Oakland Athletics because I was kind of rebelling against my Yankees fandom. And Jake Macchio went from Dylan's team to my team to Marshall's team. He was probably a number 2 option that could be squeezed into being a number 1 if needed be, but he was never like a shut you down ace. He was more of a very strikeout heavy innings eater type workhorse, and I kind of tried to reflect that with his as I based him off of 2006's season from Aaron Harang. And Aaron Harang was exactly what Macchio is. I mean, he'd strike out 200 guys, pitch 200 innings, but he'd have like a 4 point something ERA. Would go maybe like 15-10 in a good year and like 10-10 in a bad year. He's not gonna lose you games, but he's not gonna. And he could have his moments of brilliance, but he's not gonna be the quintessential ace on a team that's gonna win a championship. Now, I got his potential way up because, I want to be generous with that. I don't want guys to be shoehorned into having a lackluster career because I did just spend a month creating all these guys, and I do kind of want them to be successful. So Macchio will probably outshine my expectations for him as the years progress, but for the first few years, he should be right in line to where I want him, and then maybe one day I could maybe even have a 1-2 punch of him and Benz when Taylor retires in 5-6 years. Okay, so Hiroyuki Taguchi is a newer guy. So I always loved the Japanese pitchers. Some of them like Daisuke Matsuzaka, Hideki Arabu, and more recently Masahiro Tanaka and those guys. They've always kind of been, really interesting to me. So I wanted to have, that token Japanese starting pitcher type thing. And I didn't really ever have one of those when I was a kid because, I never thought of it. But as years progressed and more Japanese pitchers have migrated over to the MLB, as more and more people come from Japan, I always wanted to introduce more of that here, and Taguchi is kind of my attempt at that. So there isn't really too much of a backstory because, like I said, he's a newer guy. take a look at his pitches and stuff here. If I can. Where would it show? Oh, two-seamer. So you see there, he doesn't really... He pitches similarly to Benz in terms of like his pitch style and how he goes about it. He's maybe a little bit better at getting the punch outs and stuff like that, but he is absolutely just like gonna be a workhorse out of that number 3 or 4. He's kind of in the same boat as Macchio. He is to Macchio what Benz is to Taylor. So if Taylor could be a number 1, and so can Benz, but they just pitch different styles. Macchio could be a number 2, but so could Taguchi. But they completely contrast in styles, and I like having a lot of that through here. I think you'll notice that, especially when I get to some of the hitters here. But so yeah, that's where Taguchi comes into play. Is he's reliant on getting ground outs. He's not gonna punch out a million people a year. He's going to try to work around guys, eat up some innings out of our number 3 or 4 spot in the rotation, and just be really solid. So as we get down to the last handful of starters here, this is where the rotation I think is going to get murkier, and even Taguchi is going to be. So what I'm doing here with this project is I'm going to try to ignore these overall ratings as best as I can, and so that's basically just like I'm using that as a scouting report. Like my scouts are telling me that this guy's good at this, right? On-field performance is going to be the absolute barometer to how I determine playing time. So Billy Taylor, if he does terrible in spring training, he could miss theoretically the opening day roster. I'm assuming him, Benz, and Macchio are going to be safe. They'll make the roster in some situation, but from Taguchi down, the 4, 5, and long relief spot, because one of these guys is going to be a long reliever inevitably. After here, it starts getting a little murky as to who is actually going to fill out my starting opening day rotation, because a good spring could elevate somebody higher than what the rating says they should be, because that's how I'm judging everybody. So down here to Bryant Robinson. Bryant was a classmate of mine in high school. He's still remains a pretty close friend to me today. I never created him when I was a kid, so it's really interesting that I'm starting to create him a lot now. When I did this project a few years ago, and I created a 40-man roster, and I was going to watch every game and commentate over it rather than actually like control and like go through everything, and I was trying to be really hands-on. It just kind of fell apart. Bryant actually somehow pitched his way through spring training at an elite level, even though he was only ranked, as you see here, like 20 points lower than our number 1 guy. And then actually on opening day of that same franchise, Bryant pitched a no-hitter on the first game. And that's still up on this channel somewhere if you want to find it. I could link it in this description if you want. Just comment and let me know. It was unreal. I've never even thrown a no-hitter on an MLB game since like 2010, because I play on like legend difficulty. So it's a really rare thing to see when you're watching or playing, and he just happened to throw one. So like I felt kind of obliged to create him again and make him similar to how I made him in that year's game. So I based him off of 2009 Mark Burley. And so he actually has a really similar pitching style to Taguchi or Benz. Heavy innings, not relying on straight heat with a fastball. Gonna only throw like 90-mile-an-hour fastballs rather than 100. Big break on his curves and stuff like that. Mixing speeds, pinpointing locations. And I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of my guys have that kind of similarity. Later on in my relievers, though, I stray from that tremendously with my relievers, and I don't know why that is. So going onward to and as for Bryant's role, like I said, he could be a starter, he could be a long reliever, or he could start the season in the minors. It's really all in his hands at this point. How he performs is how he performs, and that's pretty much how the rest of these guys are gonna go. So I'll probably skip going over that with the rest of them and just kind of explain their origins. So onward to James Cantia. When I was a kid, I had a trio of brothers, and they were the Cantia brothers, and there was one that was a starter, that was James. There was one that was a reliever, that was Jason, and there was one that was a closer, and that was Ken. And so James is the biggest and the oldest, being a starting pitcher, and he pitches the most conservative out of them all. He pitches for control and for long innings, and he doesn't wear himself out as much. One of the running narratives between these guys is that they all have like mastery over the knuckleball, like it's just like their family thing. So they're actually the only guys on my team with knuckleballs, but all three of them have a knuckleball, and all three of them throw it really well. So they're really fun to watch sometimes, and I always had them on my team for a while, and I always stacked it up so like James would pitch like 6 innings, and then Jason would pitch two, and then Ken would pitch the ninth, and it was just like, man, the Cantillas really shut them out today, and I always thought that was really interesting. So that's where he came from. I based him off of 2003's David Wells, and you see there he's sitting at a 78. Rene Gonzalez is the next one I'm getting to, and he actually came from the idea came from not from our wiffle ball thing, but rather he came from us an MLB game. I think it was like MLB 2005 or something like that, and I was like 5 years deep into a season, and I called I he was like one of my rookies, and he just pitched lights out, so he just kind of stuck. I just kind of recreated him because I had that good memory of that one time that I had the guy call up. And there's a few others like that. Most of them didn't make the team. One would be Guillermo Castillo. I remember him, like, I called him up from the minor leagues, and this is like 2011, but he was the third baseman, and he hit like 320 and hit like 20 home runs, and I was just really stoked about it. I didn't create him for this one though, but Gonzalez is kind of the same mold. I based him off of 2004 Rich Harden. That was back when I was big on the A's because they had Harden, Mulder, Zito, and Hudson, and man, they had such a good pitching staff, and I'm a sucker for pitching, and I wanted some representation of that here, and I couldn't really make him based off of one of the better guys, so I went with the young Harden as a heavy strikeout but unpolished pitcher. So on to Mark Mamet. Mark Mamet is one of Dylan's creations. He is the older brother of a reliever, and we had to change the name because his name was Mark Mamark originally, and and his brother was John Mamark. We changed it to Mamet just so it didn't look and sound so ridiculous. A lot of these names are still pretty ridiculous, but somebody being named basically Mark was pretty funny. So we wanted to get away from that and kind of bring a sense of realism to it. And so whereas Gonzalez is young, unpolished, a fireballer, and he's gonna go for the strikeout, Mark Mamet is kind of the exact opposite. He's the oldest pitcher of the core group here, because this is where my creations end and where the game's creations start. So Mamet is the oldest, and he relies on precision rather than going for strikeouts. He's just a really polished pitcher, and I honestly think he has a chance to make it to the starting rotation. I would say Gonzalez is a complete outside chance, and Cantilla as well. But that remains to be seen going forward. And that's it for my starting pitchers. Uh, the rest of these are computer generated guys or real guys that I just didn't release. So on to my relievers, and anybody who's on the MLB team is guys I created. Anybody who's not, I didn't create. So starting off here, we got Ken Carroll, who back when I was a young boy child and we were playing the wiffle ball team thing, he was my lights out closer, and he's kind of still that. I based him off of 2003 Billy Wagner. He's a fireballer. Like I said, I go from loving to create pitchers who can't throw really hard to going to relievers who throw 100 miles an hour. So that he's the prototype of that, and he's I think the closing job is between him and John Mamet. Uh, Whoever wins it, I'm not sure, but I expect Carroll to be our closer or be our setup man, one or the other. And he's gonna go for a lot of strikeouts. He's gonna walk a bunch of guys. He's gonna give us 60, 70 innings with like 100 strikeouts. He's gonna do that. And Mamet is like his brother. He's one of Dylan's guys, and he doesn't pitch too far off him. He doesn't throw as hard as Carroll, and he has a little bit more control than Carroll. Uh, I wanted Mamet to be slated to be our closer, just because he's older than Carroll. I wanted Carroll to have a long career, and Mamet is older and more experienced because, uh, just cause. And so Mamet is based off of 2004 Eric Gagne, and I wanted to base him off 2003 Eric Gagne, but he would be way too broken for a video game if I based him off of that, because when I punched in Eric Gagne from 2003, literally everything was a 99 except for like stamina, and he just would have been too broken, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have some balance to where, hey, these guys can be beat. I don't want anybody to be like ridiculously overpowered. I want us to be good, but I don't want us to be that good. So I expect Mamet to either be our closer or be our setup man. I would lean toward giving him the nod to closer, just because he's older and more experienced. Um, Going down to Tom Ukulele, uh, he is a left-handed specialist reliever. I'm not going to be using him that way in spring training, just because it's not fair for me to do that. I'm trying to divvy up playing time equally among everybody. You can see he's a veteran. I based him off of 2009 Arthur Rhodes, because Arthur Rhodes that year was fantastic as a setup man for the Reds, and I think Ukulele would be a setup man if he was on any other team. And he's a submarine pitcher. He doesn't throw hard, but everything he throws moves weird, and he gets crafty outs, and that's who he is in this. And he's the first lefty of all these guys too, of all my relievers. Ken Cantilla, as I was saying, he's the youngest of the Cantilla brothers, and you could kind of see he's got a little bit of different ethnicity from his brothers here. Just to show you here, so the story is he's the only righty of the three, and I just he's adopted or whatever, whatever. I was 10 or 11, and I just thought it'd be really cool to have two guys that didn't throw sidearm, were left-handed and white, and then have their little brother who's African American and throws submarine and throws really hard, and as our closer. So that's kind of maybe an immature way to go about that, but whatever. So he's really young. He'll probably take the mantle of being the setup man once Mamet retires, and then Carroll graduates to be our closer for the last 6-7 years of his career or whatever. So, and then he'll probably close for a couple years after Carroll retires. Um, I can honestly see me trading either Carroll or Kentia down the line if I draft well. Like I said, this is going to be a franchise that I'm going to be playing for years. So going forward, it's really important to kind of keep in perspective what I want to do with these guys like a year from now, or like 2 or 3 years from now. So Kentia for me right now, he's going to be a high strikeout guy. I'll probably use him the most out of any of my middle relievers in my first year, and I mean, if he pitches really well this spring, he could find himself in the closer role. I don't see it happening. Not when he has a 16, 17 point edge to overcome to those guys. But he's really fun to play with because he throws really hard. He's a submariner, and submariners don't usually throw hard. And he has that knuckleball. So he goes from throwing a 100-mile-an-hour fastball to throwing a knuckleball that goes like 60 and just breaks like crazy. Julio Santana. Okay, so Santana, originally when I was younger, I always created a guy and named him Hugo Mustine. And through the years, I've kind of gotten rid of that because that was just a ridiculous friggin' name. And I hated it. And I never felt right creating him, and I never knew what look to give him. So every year I seem to have a different name and look to this guy, but it's always the same guy. Just he looks different. He has a different name, but his makeup is similar. And so his quirk is, or always used to be, is he didn't have a fastball. Looking back now, that's kind of a ridiculous notion to have. So I gave him a two-seamer here this year. But you see there, like I got two-seamer, circle change, a sweeping curve, a 12-6 curve, and a screwball. So a lot of breaking pitches, and that's just who he is. He's got decent stamina as a reliever. He could probably be a spot starter in extreme situations, and he's not gonna strike out a million guys, but you know he'll be interesting to watch. I based him off of 2002 Danny Graves, and then I think I edited him pretty moderately heavy after because Graves wasn't like an exact archetype to what I wanted it to be. Um, I expect him to be. I mean, you can see there he has a 36 ERA. He got roughed up in his first outing, so I don't know if he's gonna be able to bounce back from that. But I do expect him to be a reliever going forward in our major league team. Josh LaSalle is my cousin. I always created him. Just that this goes all the way back to when we were kids, and I'd have a franchise going, and I'd want to go show it off to him, and he always was more interested, obviously, when I could show him his character and be like, man, look how good your character's doing. So that's kind of this is just kind of a continuation of that mindset when I was a kid, and I always created him. And to me, Josh has always kind of been like a better version of what I could be or whatever. I don't know when it comes to like sports and stuff. So I just kind of felt right creating him. And I based him off of 2008 Jabba Chamberlain. He's a guy who could maybe start down the road, but right now he's going to be set up as a power reliever, and yeah, I'm excited to use him a little bit. So Jason Cantia is the third and final of the Cantia brothers. He's 23. He's the middle brother of the three, and he's kind of a hybrid of Ken and his brother. He doesn't have the stamina that his brother has, but he doesn't quite have the fastball that Ken does either. So he's yeah, he thinking here. So he's got the knuckleball, but he also has like a 93, 94 mile an hour fastball, and so he's got a little bit of power in his pitching. Eventually, he's going to be a starting pitcher. He isn't there yet. You can see his stamina is only a 65. He could vie for that long relief spot in my MLB rotation if he has a really good spring. But I'm not planning on giving him a shot at the starting rotation yet, although if he is lights out every single time I bring him in for the first 10, 15 games, I might give him a start and just see how he works. Malcolm Tomlinson is another one of those guys like Rene Gonzalez. I just had him in one of my baseball games, and he was just one of the ones that stuck. I've kind of made him more of a cliched pitcher here. You see there, he only has 3 fastballs: the 4-seam, the 2-seam, and the cut fastball. So when he pitches, he's all heat, and that's all he is. And he's my worst reliever. I don't expect him to be in my opening day roster when spring training's done, although he could shock us. So that's it for my pitchers, guys. Going onward now to the position players. This is where it's going to be a little bit interesting here, and where there's a lot more competition for roster spots and stuff, because pitching is pretty much cut and dry. You just got to outpitch this X amount of pitchers, and you're going to find yourself in this spot. Whereas the fielders and the position players, there's a little bit of like cross positioning I can do to make them fit into the opening day roster if they're not performing up to snuff, or like if somebody's competing. So let's just get into it here. Dave Cannone, he was my power hitter. From our wiffle ball days, he was my big power hitter that would like compete and break home run records and all that stuff. And when I first started creating him in MLB, I think it was like Triple Play 2001 or something, I literally just copied Mark McGwire, turned him left-handed, and made him black instead of white. And that's all he was the mirror image of Mark McGwire with a similar skill set. So I kind of brought that back here this season, and I based him off of 1987's Mark McGwire. That way he's not hitting 70 home runs out of the gate, while still being an elite power threat. He's one of my favorites of my created guys. He's always been a staple of any team I've created, and I do expect him to be our opening day catcher. I don't think either one of the other two are going to come really close. Fred Braun is a straight up power hitter. He's good for literally nothing else. You see there, he's no contact. He has no nothing really, no speed. So basically, when I created him, I was just like, I just want a pinch hitter that would hit a home run almost every time he pinch hit, and that was his usage back in those early MLB games. As the years progressed, I kept creating him, and I wanted him to play a little bit more. So you can see here, I have him as he could play third base too. For a few years in my MLB games, I had him playing third base rather than being a backup catcher. The narrative that I always gave him is that like he was kind of like the mentor for Dave Cannone. You can see there that they're both huge guys, and for a couple years, I think I just kind of made him like a worse version and a right-handed white version of Dave Cannone. I don't know if he will be in our opening day roster. You see there his contact is garbage, so his numbers are gonna certainly struggle going forward. Travis Mann is the prototypical backup catcher, um, who could start without hurting you at all. He's not known for his hitting. Um, he's a defensive mastermind though, and he could call a game, which is really important. So that's where he is in the scheme of things. Is he's like the defensive wizard of the catchers, and the veteran leadership of the catching unit. And I will probably end up choosing a pitcher. I've always liked the idea of a pitcher and a catcher having a pitcher having an exclusive catcher. So trying to think here, like late I think I'm trying to think here. There was one time in the Yankees time where they had like Jorge Posada, and then they had another catcher, but I think it was Andy Pettit only worked with the backup catcher at the time, and I always wanted to have that dynamic with a pitcher, just for story reasons. And Travis Mann, if he makes the roster, will probably have that with maybe like a Billy Taylor. Just the two veterans wanting to play together. Um, and that would make sure that whoever the starting catcher is isn't playing 162 games, because in real life, catchers very rarely play every game. Catchers play the least amount of games when it comes to like position players usually, because the wear and tear on their bodies is so much more from crouching behind the plate. So it kind of acts as a buffer to make sure that I'm not overplaying a catcher and kind of ruining their sample size. So, there's my catchers. First baseman, I have three. We got Dylan Brown. Dylan Brown is my best friend. Uh, Created him here. I've never had him be really a starter. I've always had him kind of been like a platoon first baseman or like a backup first baseman and third baseman. But I just kind of went for it this year because he's 29 and I made Don Mate 21. So like Mate will start eventually. And plus I also plan on trading all us real guys to our favorite team. So I do plan on trading Dylan to the Reds at some point. When or how that'll happen, I don't know. But you see here, he is pretty much slated to be our starting first baseman. I based him off of 2003 Nomar Garcia Parra. Going down to Don Mate. Mate has also been a staple of mine on MLB games, and even back then, I would kind of say Sean Casey was his inspiration, and he's kind of maintained that in terms of play style and even his appearance. He kind of is Sean Casey. I actually based him on the 2000 season for Sean Casey. So I expect him to either somehow beat out Dylan for the starting job or to be our backup first baseman. That's kind of where he is going to be. He is a contact hitter. He doesn't hit too much for power. He's not very quick because he is a first baseman, but he's a fielding maestro as well. So he's like your prototypical contact hitting first baseman, like Todd Helton or Sean Casey, stuff like that. And that's kind of where he's going to be. He's an everyday kind of player too. Tim Killier could find himself as a DH. He is a power hitter. You can see there on his chart up top here, he's much better against left-handed pitching than he is right-handed pitching. I don't see him starting against. I don't see him being an everyday starter. At best, he'll probably start only against left-handers. At worst, he'll be the backup first baseman. That's his ceiling for now. Whether or not he could grow into something a little bit better is more Killier was one of Dylan's guys, and he was always kind of like he was just a power hitter, and that was just what he did. I based him off of 2007's Jim Thome. And now we're on to the second baseman, and we got Dave Sinna. Sinna was one of my first creations for the wiffle ball thing. And originally he was a shortstop. He's evolved to be a second baseman who can play shortstop. And I always had his stance based on Carl Everett's because he always had like this weird like hop thing going on. They took that stance out of the games in the last 5-6 years, so now I base him off of the Barry Bonds one. Senna is a really interesting player, and it harkens back to where I was talking about with the rules that we made. For a little while, we had we were allotted one meatball per game, or like we were allotted like one, so I always wanted him to be I always wanted to hit for power from the left side of the plate. So if I wanted my meatball of the game to go to Senna, because there was only like 2 or 3 guys that we wanted, that we were capable of getting that meatball per game. It couldn't be like a contact hitter. So I made it so he was really good at hitting for contact from the right side of the plate, but really good for hitting for power on the right. And he was garbage hitting for contact on the right, and garbage for hitting for power on the left. So, yeah, he was kind of influenced by that as the years went on. He's quick. He's a good fielder. He's one of the more solid players I got, one of my more favorite ones, and I expect him to be the starting second baseman. Although Billy Hayes could give him a run for his money because he's really fast, man. Billy Hayes is Dylan's speedy guy for a while, and that's pretty much what he is. I based him off of 2000 Rafael Furcal. He could hit 300 on a good year. He's not going to hit too many home runs, maybe 1 or 2 a year, 3 or 4 maybe. But he'll hit 300. He'll get you 50 stolen bases, and he's a decent fielder as well. Scotty Burns, his ceiling is probably this season anyway, just a pinch runner type if he makes it to the major leagues. He isn't bad contact hitter, but he's not good fielding. He's just really good. He's just really fast. He's just really good at stealing bases. That's his one thing he's good at. And if he makes a team, it'll be because we need a pinch runner off the bench, and that'll be him. Jeff Organstaff, on the other hand, is a power hitting second baseman. I completely forgot about him, and I think I said this in my commentary the other day, but I remembered him like a month ago, out of nowhere. Just the name came back to me, and he's just a mediocre second baseman with some decent power for the position. That's all he is. I do not expect him in any shape, form, or fashion to make the opening day roster. He is the worst rated guy that I created. So if he makes it to the opening day roster, it'll be because of some crazy outlier spring training that he's had. On to the third baseman, we got Marshall Brown. Again, harkens back to the wiffle ball days and us playing, and we always had ourselves playing too. And so it wouldn't be right for me to not have Marshall Brown here. And I based him off of 2010 Scott Rowland because I think that kind of illustrates how Marshall is as a player a little bit. He could hit maybe 280 with 20 home runs and provide you some pretty solid fielding. Marsh could also play the outfield or first base. So if he somehow loses his position battle to Bob Hendenman or even Scott O'Brien, he could still make the roster as a backup outfielder or a backup first baseman. depending on how well he does this spring. Bob Hendonman is one of Dylan's guys, and he just kind of had I think he was more like based off like a hybrid maybe of Bobby Higginston and Travis Fryman. And yeah, he's just a third baseman. Your classic third baseman. He's based off of 1998's Bobby Higginson. He's got decent power, not elite, but pretty decent contact. In terms of hitting, he's kind of, in terms of everything really, him and Marshall are really similar. You see there's only minor differences between their skill sets. Marshall's a bit of a better fielder, and Hendonman is a bit of a better, has a little bit better plate vision. But outside of that, they're really similar players. So I really think this position battle could go either way between the two of them. But it's worth noting that Scott O'Brien isn't ranked too far below. Scott O'Brien is an interesting player. So Dylan always bounced back and forth between him being Scott Bryant and Scott O'Brien. And basically, Scott O'Brien came out of the gates in his first 5 years and was hitting like 50, 60, 70 home runs every single season. And he was like on pace to set all these crazy records. And then like just out of nowhere, he stopped hitting for power. And there wasn't any like rhyme or reason to it. Like he didn't get injured. He didn't like lose playing time. He just, everything stayed the same. He just started hitting 15 home runs a year. And there was one player in real life who kind of had this similar thing happen to him, although it was a different case. And that's who I based him off of, was 1995's Brady Anderson. So in 1996, Brady Anderson hit for 50 or 51 home runs. The most he ever had outside of that was 24. The year before, I think he only hit like 18. So what I'm going to do with Scott O'Brien is have him play, being an average power hitter, and then all of a sudden I'm going to just boost his power numbers off for a couple of years. I'll probably do that once Hendonman is gone or old or whatever, and I'm like I said, I'm trading Marshall eventually. So whenever Scott O'Brien gets his chance to start, I'm gonna have him play out his first year as an average power hitter, and then just completely buff it like a couple years in, have him go crazy for a couple years, and then turn it back down. That way I could kind of mirror his creation and how it kind of went in our thing. All right, so on to the shortstops. We got 3 of them. We got Gary Babone. Babone is my baby. I've always created him, and he was always the guy who I had. He did everything you could want at almost a perfect rate, except for hit home runs. He hits like 3 home runs in his career every time that we, because I mean we did it a few times where we like jumped forward 20 years and like we'd make all these player cards for all our guys and like show how their careers went, and it always turned out like he'd come close or even break Pete Rose's hit record, hit like 330, have crazy steals numbers, challenging for the stolen base record, was a perfect fielder, and only hit like 3 career home runs. So to do that, I'm going to be honest, he's going to be the most overpowered guy I got. He is 99 in everything except for power. And that's on purpose. He is probably going to be our starting shortstop. For a little while there, I had him at third base. When I first introduced Scotty Burns. I originally had Scotty Burns at second base. I'd have Dave Sinna at shortstop, and I'd have Gary Babone at third. So he's got a second position at third base, so if none of these guys perform well at all, I could slide him over to third base and let either Eric or Dylan Secret or Dave Sinna start at shortstop. Like I said, there's a lot of shuffling I could do with these guys with their second position. Like even Rick, I could play at second base. Um, so how I anticipate Babone doing is being the best leadoff hitter in baseball, providing us with elite fielding and stealing for like 80 bases. I'm going to be really aggressive on the base pass with a lot of guys. Eric Thompson is my older brother. Um, he always kind of, growing up, looking up to him, he always seemed like he never made a bad play when we were playing baseball, and he always seemed like he was a really good hitter and all that. And that a lot of that is just, a younger sibling looking up to his big brother and being like, man, he's so good at everything. So that's kind of reflected here. Um, he could maybe find his way as a starter on this team, depending on where everybody else goes, how well they're doing. I could definitely see him being on the opening day roster. I don't think he is not going to be there. He will be there in some format. So I based him off of 96's Derek Jeter, and yeah, he'll be around. Dylan Secret is an interesting case. He's one of Dylan's guys. Secret was not really particularly really good at hitting, but he was a good fielder. He was like a really good fielder. He had some good speed, but when it came to hitting, he was always lackluster. But he was like the world's greatest bunter. That's why uh, his name was Secret, I think, and we just kind of kept it. So when Dylan created him, his nickname was Secret, and he had a different last name. Secret Secret is what it was, and so the secret thing came in is like you never knew when he'd drop a bunt because he'd just drop it at any given time, and he was really good at doing it, and you never knew when it was going to happen, and he'd just get singles all day from doing that. So I'm going to try to carry on that tradition here a little bit here and, call out for him to do a bunt when on like weird counts where people usually want to bunt and stuff like that. Um, I don't see him making our opening day roster. His ceiling, I think, on our team is a platoon role as like a second baseman or shortstop. I don't really see him doing much else past that. Going forward to our outfielders, we got Eddie Vaughn. Eddie Vaughn is another one of Dylan's guys, and kind of like Jake Macchio, he bounced around between the three of us and provided us with. He was an okay bat. He only hit like 260, 270 every year. He capped out at like 284 one year, but he could hit you 30 or 40 home runs. Never like 50, never 60, but he was good for 30, 40 home runs, a 275 batting average, and would strike out like 200 times. He was just a heavy strikeout, heavy power guy, and he provided you with okay fielding. He's not going to win any gold gloves, but he's not a liability in the outfield. He was always a right fielder. The last few years I've put him in left field because Pete Bolibard is our right fielder, and I don't want to lose out on Eddie Vaughn getting a chance at playing time. Wally Spazier is an interesting guy too. Dylan created him, and his big thing was he'd point the bat out in the outfield and then swirl the bat around in a circle because like he's calling a shot, but he doesn't know where it's gonna go, and that was his big thing. So creating him, it's really hard because like he was never elite. He just had like that stance that Dylan loved to emulate a lot. So I created him, and I based him off of Ryan Klesko because I didn't really know who else to base him off of. And he could hit against the kind of like how Tim Killier from earlier really hits lefties good. Spazier's kind of the opposite. He hits right-handers good because he's a left-handed hitter. Um, and his ceiling's probably about the same. He might be able to find himself as like a DH, him and him and or like a backup first baseman type deal, because you see I got first base there for him. I don't expect him to be on the opening day roster though. Johnny Abstract is one of the guys I created later on. So I was maybe 10 when I came up with this, and the Fairly Odd Parents is big, and there was the Crimson Chin on that, right? And so like I'm just thinking of like other things, me being 10, 11, and I come up with the Bronze Kneecap. So John Abstract is the Bronze Kneecap. Uh, the story that I made up was kind of like if you ever saw the movie from the 90s called Rookie of the Year, where the kid falls and like breaks his shoulder, and all of a sudden he could throw like 100 miles an hour. So Abstract is kind of the opposite of that, where like he hurt his knee playing in the minor leagues, and he was like always just like an okay player, but he hurt his knee, and he had to get uh like a bronze kneecap or something like that, and it just reacted in a similar manner to how the kid from that movies did, where like he ran really fast, and but he was always scared and he always got hurt. I'll show you that real quick. His durability is way down. It's like a 32, is like the lowest of anybody. He so he's really quick, but he doesn't like running because he knows he's gonna get hurt. So that's why his base running aggression is so low. But he's really good at stealing bases. Um, and he's an okay hitter. He'll hit like almost 300 and hit like 15 home runs. And he's not too much of a liability in the field, but he has no arm either. I could see him making the roster as like the backup outfielder or something like that. But given how deep our center fielders are, I don't know if that'll happen. But yeah, Abstract was kind of like one of my childhood guys that just had a ridiculous story that was in no way logical, but here he is still in 2018, and some of those uh, thoughts from back then still carry over with him, even though, like, obviously I understand that's not how kneecaps work and stuff like that. But yeah, he'll be fun. So Derek Wall was uh, one of the guys I created in my childhood, and he was a guy who was a switch hitter and was just like a prototypical center fielder. He was a five-tool guy, had a good arm, could field well, could hit well from power, from contact, and also wasn't a slouch on the base pass either. So that's what he is here. I based him off of Bernie Williams before Bernie Williams busted out as like a all-star player every year, um, to kind of emulate that a little bit. So he'll be either our starting center fielder, I think, or our backup outfielder. Really, the same could be said for Terrence McGauran, who I'm getting to next year. Terrence McGauran plays a lot like Billy Hayes from earlier. He's high contact, steal the hell out of the ball, steal the hell out of the base. I mean, and he's a really good fielder. He was one of Dylan's favorites growing up, and I think he kind of always pictured him playing like Juan Pierre a little bit, so I based him off of Juan Pierre. Kind of like Babone, though. He never hit home runs. He just never did. Uh, he'll hit 2 or 3 a year, but it wouldn't be uncommon for him to go on a whole year without hitting a single home run either. He'll either be our starting center fielder or our backup outfielder, I think. And if he is our backup outfielder, he'll probably also play a role as a pinch runner at times too, because he's really fast. Kelly Warner is a guy that he's one of the newer guys. He's a fielding first guy. Not slow, but he's fielding oriented. So he's not a good hitter. He's not the guy you want at the plate when the game's on the line or anything like that. But he will make some good plays in the outfield. When I was growing up, one of my favorite players was Eric Burns from the Oakland Athletics. Just similar thing. Like he wasn't ever gonna win any hitting titles or anything, but it seemed like he was on web gems every single day, just making a ridiculous diving catch or like a climbing the wall and robbing a home run type catch. And so I kind of based Kelly Warner off of him. And I don't think he'll be on the major league team this year. Maybe in a few years when the landscape of our roster looks a little different and some of these bigger guys are gone, he'll find his way as a starter. Or, who knows what the future has in store for Kelly Warner. Just don't have your hopes up that he's going to be a starter opening day. Pete Boulevard is Dylan's best hitter. He's a right-handed hitter. In our season, him and Dave Cannone, my guy, kind of went back and forth breaking home run records. Like one year, Boulevard would climb ahead of Cannone, and then the next year, Cannone would climb ahead of Pete Boulevard. That's where he is. He most likely will 95% be our starting right fielder. And he's probably going to hit 300, hit 50 home runs, drive in 130 RBIs. He's going to be a beast. No doubt about it. I based him off of Vladimir Guerrero. So yeah, he's a great hitter and not a liability in the field, although he's probably not going to win any Gold Gloves. And then there's myself. I gave myself a really modest rating. Jermaine Dye was one of my favorite players growing up. He had a big arm, and I've always kind of thought I had a good throwing arm, so I kind of modeled myself after him a little bit. It's interesting how I made myself the worst out of all the real guys. I might not make the roster, but I don't really care. Eventually, I'm going to get traded to the Yankees alongside my brother, and we're going to lead them to a championship. So, there, eat that. Okay, so there it is, guys. We got everybody covered. Now you know everybody's role to the team, where I expect them to be and where I expect them to be going forward, and who they were based off, and all that jazz, and their backstories too. And I hope you really found that interesting. I really never thought anybody would be interested in that, but yesterday when I was talking to Phil was just like, hey man, it'd be really cool to hear about that. So, yeah, I did that. While we're here, I might as well show you guys how we did in the two games I didn't broadcast last night. So in our second game, we lost again to Seattle. It was a tie game up until the seventh inning when they blew up things. Cannone had a pretty solid game. John Abstract and Don Mate did too. Mate hit a home run. McGoran and Eric and me, not Eric. We both had steals. And then our pitchers, you see here, Benz gave us two really solid innings, even though he let up a home run, I think. Macchio walked 3, but ended up not getting hit for any runs. Mark Mamet gave us an inning with a strikeout. Ken Cantia got a blown save. Not because it was a save situation, because it was like the 5th inning or 6th inning, but it was 2-1, and he let up a run, and he got 2 strikeouts. Tomlinson gave us a solid inning, and then Santana let up 4 runs, and then we brought in Ken Carroll. And here in the third game, we got a win. We actually got a win, so that's good. Good for us. Braun and Cannone both kind of hit the covers off the ball a little bit. Babone and Wall got steals, and you see here our pitchers. Machio gave us a really solid outing. Taguchi gave us an okay outing. Rene Gonzalez gave us a pretty uh, good inning. Uh, Jason Cantilla gave us a good inning. Ukulele gave up the only run of the game. Tomlinson gave us a solid inning. And you see Carroll and Mamet closed it out for us. Carroll actually loaded the bases up with 3 straight walks, but ended up getting out of that situation. So yeah, now you guys are all caught up on all the games. I'm probably gonna play a couple tonight, but yeah, it was really fun explaining all this to you guys. If you liked it, please drop a like on the video and leave a comment. Start some discussion here. Ask me questions. Give me something to talk about on my next stream. Alright, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the flip side.